Hello, everybody. I have another amazing founder here today, Sergey from Axelar. Sergey, thank you for being here.
Great to chat.
Yes, thanks for coming out to the event and taking this time to dive deeper on Axelar. I usually like to start with the origin story. How did you break into crypto? And in that journey, tell us about how you woke up to the potential that Axelar could have and the value proposition that was so worth pursuing.
Yeah, the origin story is that I have technical background and I was studying PhD at MIT in cryptography before the crypto industry took the word and upset a lot of my friends. um, so at the end of the grad school, when I was pretty much done with my thesis, was looking for other problems that could change the world in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, started to play with Bitcoin and Ethereum white papers and try to understand what those stacks are about. Quickly realized that there are some technical limitations, when it comes to building applications around them. And so we started a project with professor at MIT, Sally McCallie, that over the years ended up being like the Algorand blockchain, and going to help to launch it. And once we actually launched Algorand blockchain, it was pretty clear that chains need to be connected.
Mm-hmm.
Bootstrapping liquidity, bootstrapping developers, bootstrapping user activity. You have to give the kind of distribution answers, right, to your audiences, and connectivity across blockchains and software stack is what was missing as a big missing piece. And ideally, from my view, we would have just called somebody or found the protocol, integrated, 15 minutes, done, right, and moved on. But there was nothing available in the market, and we thought this would be a pretty important problem for the growth of the ecosystem, because typically, as ecosystems grow, they only grow kind of horizontally, or not only, but they grow horizontally, and that means fragmentation. That means painful, processes for developers and users to interact with that fragmentation. And we wanted to solve that, and so that was the beginnings with Axelar. My co-founder and I, we started the project. It was, I guess, a little over 4 years ago now, and yeah, it's been a pretty fun journey since then.
Mm-hmm. So take us back to 4 years ago. Specifically, were there kinds of assets, kinds of chains, kinds of apps that you're like, this is insane that it can't be interoperable. It's useless without being able to live on multiple chains. What, or are there some examples that was, oh, obviously everybody will use this app if it were cross-chain, and not so hot if it's only on one?
I think the biggest example that I would give would be like Uniswap,
Yeah.
right? When we were starting out, Uniswap was just having its first months of, of traction and success. People were still learning what it's about to have a decentralized exchange. But I think, crypto native community quickly realized like this is the power, this is the potential. Oh my God, you can list a token permissionlessly, you can, have audience interact with it, in a completely censorship-free way. And when we were raising our first round, I remember, one of the use cases, we were like, well, imagine you had Uniswap that had tokens from these other chains. And people were like, what? You can't just list a token on Uniswap from other chains? Like, what's wrong? Like,
Yeah.
it's not like Coinbase? What do you mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, that's exactly the point. You want to have kind of a composability as Coinbase had, right, or Binance or other
Yeah.
centralized exchanges where they're not limited to one chain. That's the whole point, is that you interact with other blockchain ecosystem. But for Uniswap, like no, like to actually have a decentralized way to do that, you need underlying infrastructure to support that. And it took a little bit of convincing. It took a lot of education
Yeah.
over the years to do that. And actually, the first product that we had in mind was like, let us build a fully decentralized kind of multi-chain, cross-chain exchange. But as we took on even thinking about it, it was very quickly clear that the infrastructure layer just did not exist at all, and many apps would benefit from it as well, like stable coins, wallets, all the RWAs and things like that. And without focusing on the infrastructure was a much bigger problem that needs to be solved first. Like very focused on that since then.
Mm-hmm. And in that point, again, 4 years ago, you could have said, okay, how do we get Uniswap on other chains that makes it forward compatible? Or you could take the perspective of the backward compatible. How are you thinking about getting solo chain apps compatible on others after they were launched versus having them launch multi-chain upfront? What was the thinking at the time on enabling compatibility after one chain launch?
I would say initially, like 4 years ago, we did not know where kind of the product market fit in some sense would be, and like what stages of apps it makes sense. Like philosophically, of course, and we want to get to the point where launching an app on, across multiple chains is as easy as it is launching on one chain, right? And that's what we've been working towards. But when we were starting out, like even things like general message passing did not exist, like being able to call one contract from one blockchain to another. I actually claim that probably like our white paper was one of the first ones that kind of defined that vision. It wasn't fully clear even at that time, but I had intuition that you can have a contract interact with another contract on different chains, and like you actually would have to send like messages across with them. So it had like a nice, beautiful architecture like diagram in there. Most people like we just could not even grasp what that means practically, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it took us a little bit of time to build the stack, build the general message passing to facilitate that. I think we're definitely moving towards the world where, as an application builder, launching multiple chains is going to be as easy as launching on one chain, right? The tooling is about there. The developer stack is about there. Now you have more and more people understanding what general message passing is and how these primitives work. I do think for still a lot of the applications that have been built like throughout the last few years that have product market fits, like Uniswap, like Aave, like Compounds of the world, they are also in that transition of thinking about their multi-chain architecture and cross-chain.
In part inspired by building their own chain to begin with.
Exactly.
So that it's also compatible with others. So drilling down a little bit on one chain launch and then going multi-chain versus multi-chain from day one. Mm. What is the best way to approach that, in your opinion?
Yeah. My general advice, to the developers is understand what type of product you're building, and then one strategy or the other applies. So, as an example, if you're building like a decentralized exchange or money market that has a pretty good product market fit in the space, and then you're competing on features and distribution with everyone else that already has those products. On distribution, this is where multi-chain support is mandatory because you get access to all the wallets, all the chains, without having to think about it. And on feature sets, maybe having your own chain or maybe not, matters for you depending on what feature you actually care about. Right? So, if you have a product market fit, if you're looking for distribution, definitely multi-chain, right? If you're looking for specific features plus distribution, then it's your own chain plus having like interoperability with all the other chains from your own chain. If you are building a product that completely novel use case, right? And then, I don't know, you're tokenizing a new asset class, building like some game, right? That like you just want to get a sense of will people even like it, right? Like, is there even a product for it? I always say that pick the biggest, the cheapest chain that matters for you.
Yeah.
Like, make sure the path to launching and getting those first 100 users, getting those 1,000 users to test is like as frictionless as possible. And take it from there. And for some applications, launching that in a multi-chain compatible way is as easy as launching with a single chain compatible way, right? So you can scale later. For some applications, it may be harder, right? It depends what like your use case is. But if you are launching a token, like these days, launching a token across multiple chains, I actually argue that, and including that as a part of your application is actually easier than launching on a single chain. Like we'll build amazing stack. We'll build things like ITS, which is interchain token service. It's UI based. You don't have to even write a single line of code. Like just click, pick 15 chains, done, right? Like one transaction. So, and I think that's sort of inevitable that the tooling that abstracts the layers is starting to become more and more
prevalent. So in a way, I asked for this as a single line spectrum, but you're saying it's actually grid, right? There's intersecting spectrums. One is, do you want to be solo chain and multi-chain at the beginning? And then the other one is, do you want to be on someone else's chain or you build your own, Right. And you're highlighting it makes sense to build your own if you have feature sets that are unique you want to exercise, and you want to be multi-chain if you want to get sort of access to liquidity. But each place in the quadrant has probably some apps that are best suited to live there.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. And in your case, this sounds amazing, right? Being able to launch day one with multi-chain. Which are the projects that you think are doing that, being in the right quadrant, and which applications are doing it because it's cool, but they didn't really need it? I'm trying to identify if there are builders out there thinking about their multi-chain strategy, that should they be thinking about that today or not? In your experience, which customer profiles are rightfully there and doing it, and which are pursuing kind of a novelty?
Yeah. So I would say for all the kind of a stablecoin or asset types of applications, they are looking at their multi-chain strategy. They are looking at how to expand to other ecosystems, and like rightfully so. Right? I think actually USDC and Circle, the journey that they went through, is a good example of what an asset evolution looks like, right? Where they launch on a single chain, then they're like, oh, we want to go to 16 other chains. Then they launch on some more, and then they're like, oh no, like these assets don't talk to one another. They're not fungible with one another. They have different addresses. So let's think about like interoperability, right? And then now they're thinking about interoperability.
Wait, you're saying there could be multi-chain without the assets being interoperable?
Yes, right. Like, so
Wait, what was the point?
This is, I mean, like USDC, like that's how they started, right?
Yeah.
And then you go to Coinbase and you have
I get it.
16 different versions of USDC, right?
Yes.
And like that's not what the users want.
Yeah, totally.
So and they had to think about how to make them interoperable, right? Like so, and that was an afterthought for them. But they have the resources. They have hundreds of people that can afford to kind of do these things and like be slower in some sense. For most other assets, that's not an option, right? Like you can't build the infrastructure to be multi-chain or cross-chain, any of that. So you do need to rely on kind of solid infrastructure back end, but that would help you scale. So for assets, I would say like the biggest, say kind of product market fit and being able to issue it. Users don't care between 16 different versions of USDC or your stable coin, right? They want to have one. They want to be able to deposit from any wallet, from any chain, and like when they deposit to a centralized exchange, they want to treat it as one. Like all of that is being abstracted, so that's good. Cases where I've seen things gone wrong in some sense when you go cross-chain and multi-chain is when it's I wouldn't say it's a specific application, but it's a class of applications that they would launch like on one chain. Maybe they don't have like a full product market fit, whatever they're doing for multiple reasons, right? And then because there's a lot of other chains, they typically can get like some funding or grant to go and like relaunch on another chain.
Yeah.
And then they think about, oh, okay, I relaunched, but maybe I want to like save some X number of users that I have or some number of liquidity that I have. So they would like slap some interoperability, some bridging support in the middle, relaunch another chain. But like sure, maybe you got some funding to kind of relaunch your application, but like if your product doesn't have product market fit, like I haven't seen that playbook actually work that well. Like maybe it works for some use cases, but historically, that just signals that your application doesn't quite have the pull.
Right. So is it fair to say if a developer or a team is using Axelar, that it's not just being multi-chain, but it's day one interoperability?
Correct. Yes.
Right.
And this is a big kind of a distinction, right? Like where to your point, where traditionally people think about multi-chain, and many times it's been, how do I relaunch something on a different chain?
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily talk to previous instances, other chains and users, right? And like.
But the logic of the app, be that it's emission schedule, fully diluted market cap, and total supply. The logic of the specific smart contracts, and that as a cluster I call the logic of the app, becomes published and operating in all of the chains. And you don't have this asset bifurcation.
Correct.
Where you don't have to get the token of the app from one chain as bridged over,
Yeah.
poly app token bridge to base.
Correct.
You just have one.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like to that point, there's actually like some studies we've done, and some of investors. So Steven from Collab, a while ago, he did a pretty interesting study. He's an economist, by training, but so he did a study where he tries to understand like what is the impact on the users when things are kind of fragmented and disconnected versus unified when it comes to like basic like slippage fees as an example, right? Or a loss that you have when you're swapping one asset for another. And like it's not a hard exercise to go through, but once you unify, liquidity pools, once you unify kind of a tokens that they act as like a single, let's say liquidity pool as opposed to multiple, then the properties and the fees that the user pay at the end of the day, right? Or the losses that they incur are a lot lower.
Yeah. So let's better understand the architecture here. Let's say I'm building an app, want to launch on all 16 chains. How do I do the asset bridging from one chain to the next? How do I do within chain asset swapping? That would be different now that I'm using Axelar versus trying to launch an interoperable app in a different way, or launching the same app on multiple chains in parallel.
Yeah. I think the biggest architectural analogy I would say is that cross-chain primitives like general message passing allow you to talk between smart contracts as if they are on a single chain. Okay, so what that practically means is that let's say you have one contract, typically an application. Let's say you have one core contract that does like most of the logic, like determining like the price of the swaps, right? Like your rates, what eligible tokens are. And typically you would have like a separate contract for like deposit withdrawals, right? That maybe does like some security checks, some filters and checks for which assets are compatible and things like that. And so what you would do is that you would take this, let's say, deposit contract, right? And then you essentially could deploy it on multiple chains, and underneath it have like the messages being sent to your main core contract that then is responsible for dealing with the actual deposits, right?
Right.
And so the contracts that are responsible for deposits and withdrawals, you can call them like edge contracts. So you push them on all 16 chains of your choice, right? You have maybe one core contract that you put on whatever the ecosystem of your choice, where you're going to have most of the execution logic on. Maybe it's for gas fees, maybe it's for latency, or whatever things you're optimizing for. And then all the other contracts are just going to be edges that interact with the users, where the user can send the transaction or send the deposit. This contract would talk to the main ground truth contract on the different chain as if it was living on the same chain, like as if your architecture was all on one chain, but now it's these messages can come in from any of the 16 chains and then execute their logic and kind of revert back. So
there's a motherboard.
Yeah.
And the subsidiary logics that live on specific chains.
Yeah.
And this is necessary because the chains are different in transaction speed, finality, assumptions, and you have to then customize the logic of your app to these modules that will live separately on each chain.
You don't have to customize it though, right? So it depends on the chain, to your point, and if it has a different smart contracts, then you may have to change the smart contract itself. But if it's like it's a EVM compatible chain, you don't actually have to think about like latency, finality, and all of that. So like our infrastructure will take care of all of those thoughts. We'll take care about gas translation, making sure a transaction is safe and like finalized and is responsible for it.
So this narrative of rollup as a service is catching some attention, right? Instead of launching your own chain, well, you can actually launch your own rollup and have that be your chain. What is your take about how Axelar plays in to Axelar's value proposition plays into founders that value, hey, I'm not going to build my own layer one, of course, but I'm going to build my own chain and then think about interoperability later?
Yeah, so first of all, I think for years I actually have been saying, and I think some people quite realize it now, that like rollup is a chain with a single sequencer, right?
Yeah.
For all practical purposes. So
it's English, I guess.
Yeah. Doesn't need to be, but like in today's world, right? It's I guess like few sequencers, and then and it has a single bridge usually, right, like to Ethereum.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the time, whenever we're talking with Rollup, service providers, like, yeah, they don't want to just have a single bridge to Ethereum, right? They want to talk to everyone else. They want to talk to other Rollups from other ecosystems. They want to talk to, non-Ethereum Rollups and other chains. And so we kind of come in and, augment them with our stack and deploy, an integration with them to all the other ecosystems in parallel. So yeah, I view it as for practical purposes, a chain with a bridge and, and usually a slow one, 7 days finality. So,
Some of them, sure. Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, like, by default, users want to have, it's like instant settlement, right, of your transactions. They want to have composability with everything else. And so we kind of overlay our protocol on top.
Okay. So whether it's a roll-up or your own chain, or an existing chain, don't matter.
Yeah.
Think about interoperability through Axelar. How does the pitch for Axelar? I'm still trying to just get my mind around the current iteration of the value proposition. Fast forwarding now to 4 years later, that we give to founders. If you're building an L1, a L2/rollup, you should think about being multi-chain and interoperable through Axelar because we have the best infrastructure that will do XYZ. In this case, we've explored that a little bit. Break up the logic of the app, have it be distributed across the multiple chains, have the inputs then feed to the main logic motherboard, and have the assets be interoperable. That's great, technically fascinating, wonderful architecture. What's the incentive to do so? One, no breaking of liquidity. Two, integrity of the logic for the app. What else?
Yeah, the 3 distribution, right? So you want to have users from different chains interact with your app.
Yep.
And different wallets. And number 4, it's UX, right?
Okay.
I think the big, pain point of the last cycle, I can guarantee that, like I have seen personally many, many times, whenever you go and try to tell somebody, go check out this app on this chain, and if they're not sort of crypto native, they're like, okay, I have some, I don't know, ETH, or maybe I got some Sol token or something like that. Oh, and this app lives on what chain and what? And like, how do I bridge to it? And how do I find it? And like,
Yeah.
I need a new wallet, what? And you lose a lot of people, right, on those steps. And
Right.
The multi-chain, seamless connectivity allows you not to have that pain points for your users. And you can say a user, no matter what token you have, no matter what chain you have the wallet on, you can interact with my app, and go play with it and go learn its value proposition and like become the user. If the onboarding experience is 30 minutes, that's not onboarding experience. That's like, you have to hold somebody's kind of a, gun to their head to wait for them to kind of get to just test your application.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about your perspective on current landscape of bridges, cross-chain DEXs, DEX aggregators. How do you see their future? And how do you see Axelar playing into that or outside of that?
Yeah, so we at Axelar focus on developers, and we focus on building the infrastructure to enable any type of application to be interoperable, right? Things like token swaps or like DEX aggregators. They're typically applications or users of infrastructure like Axelar, right? And interoperability stacks. But there are many others. There's everything from cross-chain tokens, assets we talked about, borrowing and lending applications, NFT, and so on and so forth, right? So we focus on the developer stack, and there's not that many players in that category that like focus on it. Yeah, and I think the kind of the future is that most applications will transition to this mode of operation sooner or later, because I think again, for the distribution and UX, there's like no other way going forward.
I hear you. Great. So, want to understand, you've been at this for 4 years. You probably have some scar tissue that other founders could borrow from, be that in fundraising, team building, dealing with crises like Terra, which will happen again and again. It's a industry that's growing. Everybody will be shocked and surprised and is like, how could this be? How did we overlook this? and then it will still happen. So I'm sure there are some forward-looking insights for other founders you could share. Tell us about what was a humdinger for you for 6-9 months, but now you kind of looking back know a recipe, tactic, rulebook that you could convey to other founders.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's, first of all, like, yeah, I'll give a lot of good, hopefully good thoughts, but I think by default, there's no playbook in startups and there's no playbook in crypto because
Sure.
every few years are different.
Yeah, and it's the hard thing about hard things.
That's the hard things, yeah. As an example, when we're starting out, I think the whole category didn't really exist. So we had to spend a lot of time educating the category, like I mentioned, even like explaining what it means for Uniswap to be multi-chain or like cross-chain, and for people to kind of think through that. Throughout launching interoperability, I would say one of the hardest things has been interoperability in some sense came as an afterthought in many cases, and a very much needed, stack that was rolled out very prematurely by a lot of the players that all got hacked, right? I think we've seen over, 2 billion in assets being lost over the last few years from pretty bad solutions. And I think two things for that is like, one, launching a secure technology or a new category is very hard, and we've certainly done the best that we can to protect the whole stack, from top to bottom, and we know of various attacks that kind of were attempted, at the infrastructure layer at Axelar and many other interoperability protocols. Most of them fail. We have a very strong multi-tier approach to security, so we can talk more about that. But it's been stressful, right? I think kind of launching a very secure stack in a new category. In the same way as when exchanges were first launched, you hear the news like every exchange was getting hacked, right? Because somebody would steal the keys and things like that. I think in our category we went through similar things, which was very unfortunate. And I think robust stacks like us, still running for years with no issues, but it takes solid engineering and potentially slower go-to-market, right, to kind of deliver on that. So yeah, that's definitely been a challenge, and I think unfortunately, like the hacks don't really help the industry ever.
Sure.
So people have to deal with it, but. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that always we think about is that there's a lot of temptation to follow like the news, the narratives in the market. Like today is a bad market, don't launch your product. Tomorrow is a great market, launch your product, launch your token. The day after, we have a new narrative in NFTs. The day after, we have a new narrative in RWAs and things like that. And especially if you're more on the infrastructure side, you'll never catch those. Okay, because if you're thinking about a narrative and building something specifically for it, you're probably like 6 months late.
Yeah.
Like you had to foresee that, a year ago, start planning and then building for another 6 months so that like you can be there. So I always tell to the people, especially if you're thinking of things that are taking longer term to build, like have your technical convictions, like have your non-technical convictions, ecosystem, market dynamics convictions, and try to validate them or disvalidate them over the years and like build towards them, right? I think in some sense, but catching the narratives, catching the trends, very appealing. You occasionally get pushes from your partners or investors to do that, and like you may be very tempted, but you're always late. So I guess my advice is not to do that and just build for the long haul.
Yeah. And how do you manage the market cycles if you're going to be building long haul? I mean, fundraising is cyclical.
Yeah.
Launching, trying to get apps to use your product is cyclical.
Yeah.
New developers coming into the space and leaving is cyclical.
Yeah.
Right. So you're building long haul, there's still a lot of this sort of timing element.
Yeah. Yeah.
How have you balanced that?
Yeah. I mean, fundraise-wise, yeah, there's definitely good and bad, years, months to kind of raise, and when there are good ones, if you are in a position, you should capitalize on it, right? If you are, and when you capitalize on it, don't just start throwing money left and right. I would say, right? I think we've seen, many projects, prematurely starting to spend very large amounts of money before they even find product market fit, because they would benefit from previous good cycles and raise a lot of money. So we tried to be more thoughtful and be kind of genuine to where we think the money has to be spent, and make sure you have a long runway to survive any bad market in that. And when it comes to the product directions. It doesn't apply to every product, but for us, one of the things that I always said is that, we want to, and that's the beauty of being in interoperability, is that in some sense, we can go wherever there is activity. Right?
Yeah.
So like great chain is being launched. Okay, as long as it's the bar to integrate a chain is low, like we'll be there, we'll support it, right? Tomorrow that chain, like an example of Terra, is sort of compromised, or maybe there's some activity. Okay, you can go somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
We'll be there to support it. So for us, having the product that can be sort of, at least ecosystem agnostic, and be able to help the whole ecosystem, no matter where the activity or the pain points are, helped us a lot, right? And those are the quick decisions that we can make. Okay, one example, when the Terra was collapsing, right? People don't know it, but I frankly think we helped, if not saved, a lot of the Cosmos activity period, right? Because we quickly
How do you mean?
Yeah, because Terra and UST was the main asset in Osmosis, right, which was the biggest DEX at the time in the Cosmos ecosystem, and when it collapsed, essentially all the liquidity was gone.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in like one day, we essentially helped to instantiate the connection between Axelar and Ethereum, and enable like stablecoins to flow to Osmosis. So all the liquidity that needed to be there, like in the form of stables, came back, and like people just rotated to more safe alternatives, and kind of continue to grow in that ecosystems. I genuinely think if we could not have done it, like essentially like 24 hours that we have done, like Cosmos would have had like a much harder path to recovery, right? So yeah, things like
You mean specifically Osmosis or the whole Cosmos?
the whole Cosmos, like, because there's no other, Osmosis is the biggest DEX, but like all the liquidity was also from UST, and like we connect, I don't remember the number, but probably over 30 Cosmos chains, right? Like today's, or even 40.
Yeah. Speaking of which, right now, how many chains are available for developer to deploy in?
I think
in parallel, what's the maximum number of chain you could get?
Yeah, currently we have close to 70 chains connected through the stack. A lot of other exciting integrations in the pipeline, Sweet, Stellar.
Yeah, and of the ones that are, this might even be a superfluous question, but of the ones that would allow for interoperability within Axelar, what's the max number that any developer could optimize for? Is it 70 out of 70?
Yeah, there's no limit, right? Like you can go through everything, pretty much. It depends on the application. If you are building like across, let's say, like Cosmos and EVM stacks, then that's a little bit more work, because you have to have smart contracts and like different logic and different language.
Yeah.
Like in WASM, like if you're operating in the like Osmosis land and like EVM, and so it becomes harder. Typically, we see assets being like the easiest one to interoperate, across all the stacks agnostically. But for
logic is second.
Logic is second, yeah. But there's applications within the Cosmos that are leveraging like general message passing primitives that we have for onboarding. Sommelier is a good example when they're expanding to like Arbitrum and other ecosystems. DYDX similar has been leveraging a lot of Axelar flows for the liquidity.
That's an important element, right? Where you have to build this support and integration with each chain. Maybe tell us a bit about how you went around translating the different code bases, the smart contract languages, and also prioritizing which one to go after. 70 is a huge number.
Yeah, prioritization has always been like challenging, frankly, and like, back to my point, occasionally we've been mistaken where we try to catch the hype in some sense, right? Without strong long-term convictions, which I think we've kind of learned over the years.
To not do anymore.
To not do, yeah. But I think the biggest one that we've tried to do is just lower the bar for integration so that those things are not questions, right? Like if the bar to integrate yourself or get a partner to help you integrate through to the stack is like takes a day of work, then
might as well just do it.
prioritization is no longer a big question. And then when it comes to understanding different languages, different translations, that's in some sense the hard part about interoperability, right?
Yeah.
Like how do you be the translator between all of them, and kind of how do you canonicalize all of that? But we have a stellar team, and like we put a lot of design thoughts into how do you compartmentalize, and like we have various what I call like gadgets at the networking layer, some that are responsible for finality, some that are responsible for kind of routing logic. So how do you actually figure out where to go, right?
Yeah.
How do you figure out if it's a token, how do you translate the token format from another token format? So I think the whole architecture has been built pretty kind of modular in some sense, right?
Yeah.
That you can have specific building blocks, and then you can translate that logic pretty efficiently, and that makes the integrations also much easier, right? Because you can reuse some of the building blocks from others, so you don't have to build like today a new router to send your message to other chains. You only have to build like what we call as the gateway contracts, and from there you just automatically get to send your message to all the other chains, and then the network will take care of translation to the format. So you only need to do the translation for the incoming format to the canonical format, and this is the big.
And how does the developer decide where the canonical format will live?
It's still up to them, right? So you pick your kind of what I call is like home base chain, and then from there you can pick sort of your satellite chains, right? And then we will help you translate back and forth between them.
Makes sense. And as Axelar, I think this is important for other founders to know as well. How do you go about determining the key metrics that if they're doing well, you're succeeding, the KPIs, so to speak, that you measure your own performance over?
So as the community, I would say we have one North Star KPI and a bunch of secondary ones. Like the primary one that we always look at is like the amount of cross-chain activity.
Yeah.
So
it's not the bridges you've built, it's how much traffic.
It's how much traffic there, right? Because you can build, two connections and, have trillions of dollars of volume, right? Either monitor or trillions of transactions, right? Kind of flow through them. That's great. So that's a single KPI that, we focus as an ecosystem at the North Star. And then on the secondary ones, it's everything that would support that in some sense, right? Number of connections, it's number of applications that are being built, how much TVL, like applications secured by Axelar across the stack. How much developer activity we have at various stages of the life cycle on the test nets, on main nets, in production, like a year.
Was it obvious to determine your success based on this, or most of the time, or did you arrive at this later? And so how did you say this is the best KPI?
I mean, the transaction volume has always been there, I would say, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it took a little bit of time to just kind of make it explicit across the ecosystem. But other ones, I would say, and I think it's still pretty healthy to do, we kind of alternate on their importance, right? So if you're in the very early stages, maybe you don't have anything on the main nets yet, then you have to keep track of your developer pipeline then, right? It's like how many people are in dev nets, test nets, trying to get funding, get to the main nets subsequently. That's all you have. And then maybe some of them grow to the main nets, then you start tracking of, okay, how much activity do they add? How much TVL do they have? How many unique users do they have? And things like that.
And at that point, can you even call transaction volume a KPI? If there's like, yes, one could argue you should and recognize it's at 0 right now. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Just be cognizant that the measurable KPIs will differ over time based on the stage.
Yeah, and I actually frankly think that like having a single KPI like across the ecosystem also helps you with like all the questions that you asked before, like prioritization.
Yeah.
Because like we as a community, we have a lot of partners, we have a lot of people that are building integrations and things like that. And like it's very easy to get distracted and focus on the thing that you're doing without understanding how much value it would add. So I always tell to the people, if you're building something around Axelar, put a number of how much volume do you think it will add. in 5 years, okay? If everything is successful, like if your bets pay off, like how much, volume do you think this like program that you do, connection you make, chain that you add in will add, right? And if everything has that number, even if it's hypothetical, even if it's made up, but it is somebody's conviction, then we can go and say, okay, this is maybe more important, maybe less important. You can put discounts on some of people's convictions or multipliers, depending on how optimistic or pessimistic they
Yeah,
are.
we should have a bets market on like how much traction did the apps actually generate after they met a prediction. And then if they've been generally accurate in the past, then you
I mean,
can
you
rely
don't
on
ask
that.
the apps, you ask someone else.
I mean the
Yeah.
developers or whoever is just kind of in the community.
I think there should be a category in the Poly market, like
Yeah.
bet on the app activity before it goes live.
Right.
Let's do that.
I mean, that'd be fun. It'd be like do the democratized VC, except it's a bet rather than
And like there was so much
buying a
technology
token or equity of a company.
to the all the participants of the ecosystem.
Sounds good. Okay, so which would be the mother chain for this app?
Um,
We're clearly launching it on Axelar.
well, it's the Poly market.
Okay,
What are they on? Polygon now, right?
yeah. Okay, and what
But
makes them interoperable and multi-chain then?
The app itself.
Yeah.
Poly market has pretty bad multi-chain support.
Yeah. So why haven't they done it with Axelar already?
Well, I think they've been busy just trying to keep up their servers, but I'm sure that
Servers? I thought they were supposed to use blockchain. What the heck?
they have servers and the blockchain.
Indeed. So tell me about the vision. Okay. 3-5 years out, what does that future look like to you? I mean, I could imagine and project that based on what you said, you're conceiving that apps will be pick one chain, but go multi-chain as soon as possible and reasonably justified for you to do the lift. Use Axelar. Don't even let that be a thing that your user knows. Come to the app on any which wallet and any which chain you have with any which asset you have and execute your transactions. Is that kind of a correct read?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like the chains will be abstracted.
Yeah.
I think even I hope things like multi-chain or cross-chain will also be abstracted. It's like launch your app.
Yeah.
Specify, kind of what types of assets you want to have in it. And no matter what those assets are, no matter what the users have their wallets with those assets, they'll use your app.
Okay.
Like that. Like
Axelar sounds very crypto heavy. Maybe you should rebrand it to App Launcher.
App launcher. Well,
and then just don't even say like, of the 70, pick a number. How many chains you want?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's maybe that should be the new product name.
Yeah. Okay. So chains you select won't even quite be coming up as an important metric. It's like multi-chain.
I mean, it's a developer potentially choice, but today it's the primary focus of our conversations in the crypto, right?
Yeah.
Which, I think you can only go so far with.
Yeah. What database are you using? MongoDB.
Right.
Ooh.
Right.
It's not really how Web2 is talking about stuff.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you make it cool to be interoperable and multi-chain?
That's a good question. How do we make it cool? I think you should try the UX of some of the things that have, multi-chain, cross-chain support.
Which is the highest volume multi-chain interoperable app?
So I think some of the cross-chain swap applications have the highest volume. So applications like Squid, built on top of Axelar, have very seamless UX. You get to swap your tokens like in under 10 seconds in most cases. Many wallet support, many chain support. You don't have to even think about them.
And does it automatically create a wallet for me in any which chain?
So if it's a VM and it has the same address, then you get it at that address, right?
Okay.
And then
the
wallets have to transition to be more multi-chain supported. I think.
I mean, the whole thing about the public-private key cryptography being a common denominator should make it easy for a wallet to spin up a wallet app to spin up a wallet on any chain.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the same framework.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a feature that Axelar could kind of borrow and bring into the tech stack. Any wallet, any chain, any logic, interoperable, and here's the way to do it. Come and launch here.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a bets market.
And that's one of the.
So
the money option.
So the money that is bet on prioritizing which one should be supported first actually goes into supporting the project, perhaps.
Yeah.
That could be cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sergey. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
And hearing the origin story and your vision for the future. Look forward to seeing how the future unfolds for Axelar.
For sure. Awesome. Thanks for having me.